I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm a civil human minister, and we're doing a civil human Bible study. And what that means is that I'm approaching these scriptures with basically two objectives. I'm approaching it first as a human being so that we can find common ground, to look at these scriptures and find those things that are teachable and that can be applied to all humans across the board. And then the second thing is that I want to be civil and I want to help create peace by respecting those things that we need as humans, those basic shared needs, the need to believe what we want to about the big unanswered questions, the need to be independent from intimidation and control, the need to vote for those who are going to have control over us, the need to intimately love the person of our choosing, and the need to live a lifestyle the way that we want to. So now let's go ahead and go into this passage now that we have some sound. And it's Matthew chapter 12. Yesterday we were talking about the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders who were trying to plot to kill and destroy Jesus. And today we're going to get an idea of what better leadership looks like. So start in chapter 12, verse 15. But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. And he warned them not to make him known, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoking flax he will not quench, till he sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust. There's a lot to unravel in this particular passage, especially since there's a lot of metaphor being used, especially in that prophecy by Isaiah. So I want to walk through a little bit of that, explain what that's all about. But first, I want to start with verse 15. So it says that Jesus knew, and this is referencing back to yesterday's conversation. The Pharisees are plotting to kill Jesus because he's doing all these great things, and crowds are beginning to follow him and not follow the Pharisees and the religious establishment and institution. And these Pharisees don't like that because, of course, their institution is what they've worked their whole lives for, and they've made a pretty healthy lifestyle off of it as well. And so Jesus is sidestepping all of that and just going to the people and helping those who are suffering, the ones that the religious leaders won't even bother to touch. And so now he's getting a lot of followers. The religious leaders are plotting to get rid of him. And so when it says, when he knew it, Jesus knew that this is what was going to happen. Any person who has a good mind about them understands that when we start to make headway and rock the boat and start to influence the decisions of a great number of people, that's going to upset the people who are relying on the system that is there. And this word that's used here and says that Jesus withdrew to another area, this word has a connotation of fleeing. It's an idea of moving away from something that's dangerous. And I like that they included this in the passage. It's not like Jesus just haphazardly decided to go, but it was sort of an intellectual decision, a choice to recognize that he couldn't stay because these people were not interested in listening at all. They were interested in only killing him. And so he recognized he's got to move on and has got to move on to bigger and better things. And so what happens? The crowds actually follow him, much to the frustration probably of the religious leadership. And as they follow him, Jesus continues to heal them, he continues to teach them, and continues to be an influence, a great influence on these people. And so the next section that I'd like to talk about is this note that's put in there that Jesus told them not to tell other people so that he would not be known. It's an interesting strategy, right? I mean, most of us would assume that if we're doing amazing things that we would want people to know about it. We would want people to care. We'd want to be in the news. We'd put out press releases so that the media outlets would know. There's a certain criterion of what we're supposed to do in society. I love actually that Jesus recognizes that sometimes it's more important to keep doing the things in the quiet, on the down low, to help people, because once the people know about it, then the enemies come out And then the people who want to fight you and who are frustrated with your leadership are going to start attacking. So it makes complete sense to me that Jesus tells them, don't tell anybody right now. Let's just keep this between us here. So what's this whole prophecy of Isaiah, right? Matthew, who wrote this book originally, Jesus' student, wrote it in Greek in the first century to the Jewish people. What's he talking about? And why is it relevant to his audience? So Isaiah is one of the major prophets, or like preachers or evangelists, if you want to call him that. A guru, that would be another term for it. But he's a significant feature in the Israeli and the Jewish population, and has a whole entire section of the Old Testament that is basically his writing. And he was significant in the history of the Jewish people because he brought the Jewish people back to really following after Yahweh, or the Jewish God. So he really turned Israel around and brought them back to the faith that Jesus is going to take over and bring them back into as well. And so we have Isaiah, and he writes this is in chapter 42, for those of you who want to look it up in Isaiah. He basically starts talking about something that's going to happen, that God is going to bring a servant who is going to do great things, and he starts describing the characteristics of this leader, of this person who's going to come forward. We've talked a little bit about the concept of the Messiah. It's this king that was kind of promised to come. You know, some people might say this is, you know, the prophecies of foretelling, like being able to see the future. Perhaps, and that might be the case, but it's also could be the case that this was just a reasonable conclusion by this person who was well studied in you know, people, and understood the way that people operate, and knew that eventually this would come out, that a person would stand up. So, you know, take it whichever way you want to in the concept of prophecy. Regardless, what I love about this passage is we're going to walk through it quickly, step by step, is how important it is about talking about good leadership and the difference between what the religious leaders of Jesus' day were doing. So let's go ahead and walk through a couple of those verses. So the first thing that it says is that he will bring justice to all the nations. There are two things here that I want to talk about. Justice, this word in the Hebrew is mishpat, and it's a really significant word in the Jewish faith, because justice is really what sets the tone and the bar for what's good and what's bad. And it has to do with the equality of all people. In the Jewish worldview, there is no difference when it comes to the king or the beggar. Both of them fall under God's law equally, and there is no difference. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy, it doesn't matter if you're low class. What matters is this mishpat, this justice, which is allowing to make sure that people are treated equally and those who are injured are righted. And what is done is good. And it's this whole precedent of society. This is not what's happening right now in Jesus' time. They do not have this currently. Right now, the religious leaders who are wealthy and have significant political influence are making a killing off of the poor people. They're taking taxes off of the poor. They're making them spend money to buy specific types of animals to sacrifice in the temple. There's all kinds of things that they're doing that is essentially robbery and thievery in the eyes of Jesus. And there's a great injustice and suffering by the poor and the sick in this society right now. So it's significant that Matthew points this out. So the second thing that I want to talk about in this is that he mentions that this justice will be brought to the Gentiles, it says. This word essentially means all nations. It essentially means anybody who's not Jewish. Goyim is the Hebrew, for those who are curious. It is anybody outside of their faith. So basically, this guy is saying, Isaiah, this person's going to bring justice to the world. I think it's an interesting point. You know, the teachings of Jesus have in fact influenced a significant portion of the world. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and any number of other influencers in our society. So then he says a couple of other things about this good leadership, and that is the first, he's not going to be shouting in the streets or quarreling with people or being bombastic. He's going to be quiet. His voice isn't going to be heard. This is distinct and different in Jesus's time. The religious leaders, again, the political and the wealthy, go out on the street corners and preach and pray and do all of these things for show because they love people's attention. And Jesus is all about, do this stuff in private. Do it so that it is done because it's good to do and not because you're looking for appreciation or praise or anything along those lines. The next point in this, it's a weird statement. It actually took me a little while to kind of unwrap what this was talking about. But you have this statement that he will not break a bruised reed. And what that means is, if you take a reed of grain, of wheat, there's a long staff, and then at the top there's a head of grain, which is where we, crush it and make it into flour or to oats, depending on what it is. So imagine that this is broken, and so it's hanging off to the side a little bit. And so what he's saying is this type of leader, this servant who's going to be coming in the future, is not going to snap this off and get rid of it just because it's broken. He is going to do the opposite of that, and that is to restore it so that he can still use it. And the second is this idea of a wick or a candle that is smoldering will not be snuffed out. And this is pretty simple to understand, right? There's a candle, the flame's just about to go out, and Jesus and a good leader is not the kind of person who says, well, this person's about to pass out, is just overworked, just gonna snuff him out, get rid of him. That's not the quality of a good leader, and it's not the quality of Jesus's ministry. And this is something that I absolutely love, and that is that people get burnt out. But it doesn't mean that they are no longer useful. It means that we need to take care of them and look at them to build them back up. And the last thing that is said in this prophecy is that all humans will hope in what Jesus stands for. And again, this word Gentile means all the nations. And this essentially is what he's saying is, look, Jesus is going to fight for the equality and justice of all people, even men and women in that culture, which would have been crazy and different than not being done really in the world. Jesus puts everybody at an equal position where they all follow after justice. That's his ideal. And humility, compassion, peacemaking, the things that we've been talking about for a while now, and that Jesus keeps putting forward, these are going to be hoped in by the world. And it isn't so much that it's Jesus as the person that people are hoping into, it's what he stands for. And there are a lot of perhaps people of faith or even Christians or people of the church who think that it's all about identifying with Christianity, or that it's all about the name and actual person of Jesus. I don't believe that's the case. I don't even think the text really connotes that. I think what it really means is that these principles that Jesus stood for, that have been written here, are useful and appropriate and good for all people. And that's exactly where I'm coming from right now in this Bible study, and that is finding those common teachings that we all as humans can agree to. So let me give you a couple walkaway points. These are the things that really stuck with me in this passage, and that I've had to do a lot of thinking about and will continue to as I go forward. I'm sure that you have had, I know I have had experience with two different types of leaders, right? On the one hand, there's, and forgive me, the jerk. And then there's the Jesus. And there's two different personalities, two different ways of doing leadership, right? The first one is all about being a great leader by fighting, by being brutal, by being a bully. They break the rules any way they can get away with. They will make sure that they are in the news all the time at rallies, bragging about themselves, showing off. They'll make fun of people who are injured. They'll fire or get rid of anybody who looks weak or is burnt out. That's one type of leader, and we've probably all had an experience with that kind of person. And then there's another leader, and this is represented by Isaiah's prophecy of Jesus and Jesus' teachings in general. And that is one, a great leader works to bring peace. If there's conflict in the organization between employees, whatever it is, there's reconciliation sought. There's community and unity of purpose in it. This individual, this leader, will be the kind that will follow the same rules as the lowest employee on the ladder, that they see it as an equality and that everybody's an equal part in the business and contributes importantly. They will be humble. That's another quality. Though they are perhaps as a leader in a position where they are in the public's eye, they'll do it because that's a necessary part of their work, not because they crave the attention. And they always will point out the other people who are greater and who do the work and to make these things possible. And last, those who are weak or are broken or having difficulty, maybe they've made a mistake or they're burnt out. This kind of leader recognizes the value in building that person up, in stopping to give them help, to turn them around. And in my experience, the benefit of that kind of leadership is that that individual who's healed and who's brought back and who's given a second chance, not everybody can turn around, but there are a lot of people who can. And they will have the greatest impact in the organization often because they have a sense of appreciation and a participation in the culture and community of the business. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know I've really been thinking a lot about leadership, and in our political world right now, we're going to have to vote for somebody who's going to be our president. As you know, I've chosen to remain apolitical and to not endorse any candidates. But what I can talk about are the virtues and the values that I'm pulling out of these scriptures that are human, and that are good, and that are reasonable. And so I leave it to you and encourage you to think about these things as we look at our leaders in our world, in our nation, in our work, or even in our community. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this Bible study. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your comments. If you have any comments, please put them in the comments below. I'll respond to them as soon as I can. And your thoughts and reflections really help all of us to understand these ideas better. And until tomorrow, I want to say to you, I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It is the only love that we have any control over in this world. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.